The headline of the New York Post article could not have been more descriptive and true. The headline read, Americans will lie about pretty much anything. The article was published in 2016. It was based on a nationwide survey of 2,000 people. Part of the article read, the next time someone tells you this meal is delicious or you don't need to lose weight, it's a good bet they're lying. And with the first sentence of the article, they had my attention. Based on their study, these are the top 3 lies told by Americans on any given day. Number 3, sorry, I'm sick. Roughly 78% of those surveyed admitted to using that one. Number 2, I love this present. Of the participants, 80% admitted to uttering this well-meaning lie. And the number 1 most common lie was, I'm fine. It was told by 92% of those surveyed. It seems that Americans have decided that there is a difference between, well, a little white lie and a big fat whopper. The survey's authors offered an interesting perspective. They said the 5 least serious lies feature 2 key traits. They spare the recipient's feelings, and for the most part, they cause no harm. I would not be surprised to know that there are at least some of us who have no problem with a little white lie. We can justify using the same reasoning offered in the article. We want to spare someone's feelings, and we don't feel that this little white lie will cause any harm. Author Josh McDowell tells a story about a man who wanted to buy property next to his current home. The neighborhood had seen better days, and so had the house on the adjacent lot. That's when the man brought in his brother-in-law to look at the house. The brother-in-law worked in construction and home improvement, so the man was anxious to hear his brother-in-law's opinion. The brother-in-law couldn't help but be disappointed when he saw the overall condition of the house. Renovating the house, it was going to be a challenge. But at least at that point, he felt like it could be done. And then the two walked into the basement. There were gaping cracks in the foundation, and the structure support was sagging. The brother-in-law told the man, this place is falling down. Nothing you fix up there will be worth a dime because of what's wrong down here. He felt like upon inspection, the house would be condemned. And that's because the foundation was cracked and crumbling. McDowell follows up that story with this statement. He said that house provides an apt illustration of the problems that face your family and mine. We all sense that something is happening to the moral foundations of our culture. He pointed to violence, growing disrespect of people. Human life means nothing was a quote from one teenage gang member. And it's not just a lack of respect, it's a lack of justice, true fairness in the way that we treat people. It's a lack of love, forgiving others, and self-control. A major point, this was told by journalist Roland Nethaway. He said, people don't seem to know right from wrong. People don't seem to know right from wrong. The problem shows no signs of resolving itself. But Jesus' teaching in the Sermon on the Mount reminds us that this problem is not new. That brings us to our study tonight in the Sermon on the Mount. We're in Matthew chapter 5, and tonight we're looking at verses 33 through 37. Jesus said, "Again, you have heard that it was said to the people long ago, 'Do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you have made.' But I tell you, do not swear on oath at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair white or black. All you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one." How dangerous is deceptive language? The Apostle Paul said in Romans chapter 3, verse 13, "Their throats are open graves, their tongues practice deceit. The poison of vipers is on their lips, their mouths are full of cursing and bitterness." I find this interesting. That is 3 Old Testament quotes back to back to back. The poison of vipers is on their lips. It's an interesting statement. The word viper is asps, A-S-P-S, in several of our translations. Strong's Concordance tells us that this is a small but most venomous serpent, the bite of which is fatal unless the bitten part can be immediately cut away. The poison of vipers is on their lips. Gregory Brown offers this insight. He says, "Sin has affected everybody's integrity. Children struggle with lying. Adults struggle with it, and the aged struggle with it also. Dishonesty is an epidemic from preschool through graduate school, from the home to the workplace. It is often hard to trust people in our society." Dishonesty really is an epidemic in our world today. I think about the impact that the pandemic had in our society. So much of that struggle was visible. Even now, we're seeing the deep impact that dishonesty has on people. What kind of impact has dishonesty had on our society? Especially what we consider epidemic proportions. We know that the temptation to lie is the work of Satan. It's the product of our sinful nature. So recognizing that, why do people lie? Why are people dishonest? People lie to make themselves look better. A little exaggeration makes a story more exciting. People lie to protect themselves from consequences, often to cover up a failure that was committed. People lie to gain something they want, like a good grade, a promotion, or tax benefits. In Matthew chapter 5, Jesus addressed an abuse of oaths and how dishonesty was prevalent in the time that the Gospels were written. As we look at that, this is our goal this evening, to be a people who practice truthfulness. Back in Matthew chapter 5, verses 33 and 34. "Again, you have heard that it was said to the people of long ago, 'Do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you have made.' But I tell you, do not swear at all." We want to go back to the original teaching, and as we do so, let's make this first point. To practice truthfulness, we must reject deceptive practices. To practice truthfulness, we must reject deceptive practices. What did the Old Testament law say about making and keeping an oath? Here are a few passages that address that issue. Deuteronomy chapter 10, verse 20. Fear the Lord your God and serve him. Hold fast to him and take your oaths in his name. Deuteronomy chapter 23, verse 21. If you make a vow to the Lord your God, do not be slow to pay it, for the Lord your God will certainly demand it of you, and you will be guilty of sin. What was the issue here? It seems clear, but that's not exactly the way that rabbis were teaching when it came to vows. D.A. Carson says the conversation among rabbis began to question which vows were binding and which ones were not. The swearing of oaths thus degenerates, this is from Carson, degenerates into terrible rules which let you know when you can get away with lying and deception and when you can't. These oaths no longer foster truthfulness, but weaken the cause of truth and promote deceit. Swearing evasively becomes justification for lying. Specifically, some rabbis taught that as long as people didn't use God's name in the oath, they were free to break it. Check this out. This is the verse they used to justify being able to break their oath. So Leviticus 19, verse 12. Do not swear falsely by my name and so profane the name of the Lord your God. I am the Lord. You talk about taking a verse and just pulling it out of context. That was the verse some rabbis were using to justify lying, as long as they did not include the name of the Lord. So here's how they got around it. They would swear upon one's mother, father, Jerusalem, or something else that, well, it appeared sacred. It was like a child making a statement with his fingers crossed, meaning it was okay to lie. Jesus talked about this inconsistency later in Matthew chapter 23, verses 16 through 22. Woe to you, blind guides! You say, if anyone swears by the temple, it means nothing, but anyone who swears by the gold of the temple is bound by that oath. You blind fools! Which is greater, the gold or the temple that makes the gold sacred? You also say, if anyone swears by the altar, it means nothing, but anyone who swears by the gift on the altar is bound by that oath. You blind men! Which is greater, the gift or the altar that makes the gift sacred? Therefore, anyone who swears by the altar swears by it and everything on it. Anyone who swears by the temple swears by it and by the one who dwells in it. And anyone who swears by heaven swears by God's throne and by the one who sits on it. Religious leaders wanted to make it look spiritual. Remember, they were concerned with outward appearances. But when they made oaths with no intention of keeping them, Jesus, well, he had a special name for that, had a special name for them. He called them hypocrites. We need to ask this question. It's been a hot topic in some circles. Is it wrong to take an oath? One of the greatest examples in my lifetime would be taking an oath in the court of law. Did Jesus forbid such an oath? Just to be clear, there are some people who've been quite adamant about this and will not put their hand on a Bible and will not take an oath. They quote this passage from Jesus in Matthew chapter 5, verse 34. But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair white or black. Now, I admire and I respect their conviction, even though I might not be as convinced that that's what Jesus was teaching. Jesus made an oath in Matthew chapter 26, verses 63 and 64. But Jesus remained silent. The high priest said to him, I charge you under oath by the living God, tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God. You have said so, Jesus replied. But I say to all of you, from now on, you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven. I find this interesting. Whether it was the Jewish trial or the Roman trials, Jesus did not answer any of the trumped up charges against him. However, when he was asked if he was the Messiah, he responded. In this case, he responded when challenged to speak an oath by God. The Apostle Paul took oaths several times in his epistles. 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 23 says, I call God as my witness, and I stake my life on it, that it was in order to spare you that I did not return to Corinth. Galatians chapter 1, verse 20, I assure you before God that what I'm writing you is no lie. Now, so there are examples from Jesus and from the Apostle Paul where oaths were taken in the New Testament. Now, rest assured, given these two, those were well thought out statements. They were spoken in truth with no intent to deceive. The point Jesus was making, I believe, an important one for the people gathered on the mountain here in Matthew chapter 5, and for us today. If we're going to practice truthfulness in our speech, we must reject all dishonest practices. That's what I believe Jesus was pointing to in Matthew chapter 5. And then in Matthew chapter 23, he was pointing out the deceptive practices, lying, stealing, cheating, the abuse of oaths. So if we want to speak truthfully, we need to put away all deceptive practices, not even a hint of deceitfulness in our speech. Second key point is this. We are accountable to God for every careless word spoken. Matthew chapter 12, verse 36 and 37. But I tell you that everyone will have to give an account on the day of judgment for every empty word they have spoken. For by your words you will be acquitted, and by your words you will be condemned. Revelation 22:15 says, outside are the dogs who practice magic arts, the sexually immoral, the murderers, the idolaters, and everyone who loves and practices falsehood. Then in Hebrews 4:13, nothing in all creation is hidden from God's sight. Everything is uncovered and laid bare before the eyes of him to whom we must give account. In our truthfulness, we acknowledge the sovereignty of God. He is the ultimate judge of our words and our motives. I want to conclude our study tonight with a strong commitment to speak only truth. Going back to the ones in the courtroom who don't want to take oaths, I really think that the ultimate message, this is probably the respect I have for them, is that when it comes down to it, they're just striving to live by the words of Jesus, where he said in Matthew 5:37, all you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. Not only should our oaths be truthful, but also our regular daily conversations. We want to avoid exaggerations. We want to avoid half-truths. If we're serious about being followers of Jesus, then our words must be truthful at all times. In John chapter 8, verse 44, Jesus described Satan as the father of lies. When we practice dishonesty in any form or fashion, we have opened the door for Satan. We have allowed him to speak through us. We are letting Satan use our words to deceive, to discourage, and to destroy. That's why Paul would write in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 25, therefore each of you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully to your neighbor, for we are all members of one body. Why is it so important for us to be a people of truth? We talked about one important factor. God's going to judge every word that comes from our mouths. There's another point to consider as we leave. Others are looking at us and listening to us. Our truthfulness speaks volumes about our faith and integrity. We put the lessons of this passage into practice. Let me say that again. We put the lessons of this passage into practice. We let the Lord impact how we conduct ourselves. And isn't that our goal? To follow the teachings of Jesus? When it comes to anger, when it comes to sexual purity, when it comes to marriage, and when it comes to telling the truth. We're honest people, a people of our word, a people who follow God's word. And for us, our ultimate goal is for yes to mean yes and no to mean no. Speaking the truth, it's just that simple.